Hey everybody. In the last video we talked about suffering, and we talked about real suffering, which is a part of life and necessary, we cannot escape it, or unnecessary suffering, suffering that is optional for us. Now with real suffering, I know when it happens, because when it happens to me, it falls on me like a wet blanket. It totally surrounds me and covers me in the suffering. And it's real and it's now, and I can identify the cause, and I am living it right at the moment. So real suffering, not too much of a problem to know when it is happening to me. The suffering that I think we want to pay more attention to is the unnecessary suffering. The suffering that, number one, is not related to an actual event. And in the now, it is not even happening. The event does not even exist. And what I wanted to see what we could do is there a way to identify when I'm getting involved in unnecessary suffering? And a little tip that I use is when I want to identify the situation I'm in, is am I using a what if question to myself? So from the last video on suffering, we talked about this imaginary test that I made up for an example that I was going through, and the test is for something that could be serious and have ramifications if the test comes out negative for me. And the what if question is, well, what if this test shows I have cancer, leukemia, whatever? The what if says I am now dealing in imaginary suffering. What if my family doesn't have a father anymore? What if my wife no longer has a husband? And this is bringing in an imaginary event. It's predicting the future, bringing it into the now, and treating it as if it is real in the now. So I find that what if question is a good way to help me see if maybe I'm dealing in an area of unnecessary suffering. Now, with today's events and everything, with the coronavirus and all, I think we're in an ideal situation to bring unnecessary suffering into our lives. I'm sure every one of us could come up with a dozen what if situations about the future that can cause us suffering. What if I can't get to work? What if they shut down my job? What if I'm not getting paid? What if the food supply chain isn't working and I can't buy food on the shelf? What if my sick wife can't get her medicine? We can what if this thing to death. And that causes the anxiety, and that brings an imaginary future into the present, and we really start to suffer. And I think this coronavirus situation is an ideal situation where we can introduce a lot of suffering into our lives. So I want you to think about that. I know I'm thinking about that. And when I use the what if question, am I doing a what if here? What if, we're trapped in our house, and what if we run out of food, and what if I get the virus, and who's going to take care of my wife, and what if my wife gets the virus, and what if she dies, and what if these things to death? And you bring in an imaginary event into the present, and you suffer for it. I want you to think about that what if, and I'll have some more to talk about in the next video. Anyway, things to think about. Talk to you soon.